Thank you very much, Randy. I want to devote this segment of the broadcast to an email question by Anthony. It is a very important question. It is one of the reasons that Paul Meyer and I, a number of years ago, wrote a book called The Da Vinci Code, Fact or Fiction. At this time of the year, there are so many documentaries and books and pontifications that seek to undermine the gospel narratives, to seek to destroy the very foundation of the historic Christian faith. Anthony is asking the question specifically, was Jesus married? He says a program called The Gospel of Jesus' Wife claims a fragment of a document called the Gospel of Mary, which identifies Mary Magdalene as the wife of Jesus. And in reply, I think it's important to point out that in an age of historical and biblical literacy, it's become increasingly popular to perpetuate the notion that Jesus was married. Because we're biblically illiterate, it is so easy to get away with that kind of fiction. The role of Mrs. Jesus in these fanciful depictions is most often played by Mary Magdalene. In fact, the notorious novel that I just referenced, The Da Vinci Code, has received so much attention for its iteration of this tired old tale. And in contradiction to the claims of sensationalistic scholars like Dan Brown, a survey of the evidence demonstrates conclusively that the married Jesus myth is nothing more than radical historical revisionism. There's not a scintilla of evidence in Scripture, in the writings of the early church, or, for that matter, in the extra-biblical accounts of the life of Jesus, that he was ever married. Contrary to the offhanded mention of Dan Brown's character T-Bing, of countless references to Jesus and Magdalene's union, there are absolutely none. In fact, such references are conspicuous by their absence. The two documents most often cited in support of the married Jesus myth, the Gospel of Philip and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene, which Anthony mentions in his question, were written too early to have any credibility whatsoever. In fact, Fragments of Truth counters the claim head on, and it does so by citing none other than Irenaeus. Irenaeus, of course, was one of the earliest people to comment on the false Gnostic Gospels. Imagine these comments on the falsity of the Gnostic Gospels this early on in church history. Irenaeus ridicules these Gnostic writings. He says, the ink is still wet. The ink is wet on these documents. They weren't written in the apostolic age. They don't have the ancient credentials that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John have. Again, this is Irenaeus. He is one of the early apologists in the Christian church. Another early church writer, the 4th century father of church history, so not an insignificant person, Eusebius, often talks about apocryphal texts as well. He says, they clearly were not written by the apostles or associates of the apostles. They claim to have been written by Thomas or by Mary or by whomever. But, says Eusebius, these texts are bastards. They're illegitimate children because They don't have the parents that they claim to have. You'll notice that these early Christian writers or historians did not mince words. But there's another noteworthy point that ought to be made here. While no evidence from the historical record supports the notion that Jesus was ever married, the New Testament contains powerful evidence that Jesus was not married. Let me give you an example. In 1 Corinthians 9:5, Paul defended his right to have a wife by appealing to the fact that Peter and the other apostles had wives. Remember the words of the apostle? He said, "Don't we have a right to take a believing wife along with us, just as the Lord's brothers and Cephas?" Now, if Jesus had been married, it is unthinkable that the Apostle Paul would have neglected to appeal to Jesus as the ultimate precedent. And for this reason, Paul Meyer, professor of ancient history at Western Michigan University and co-author of my book, The Da Vinci Code, Fact or Fiction, aptly refers to 1 Corinthians 9:5 as, I love the way he put it, as the graveyard of the married Jesus fiction. So in answer to Anthony, was Jesus married? Absolutely not. There's a lot of sensationalism and sophistry, a lot of selling going on in the current epic. And we ought to be ready always to give an answer, a reason for the hope that lies within us, with gentleness and with respect. And above all, it is so important that we can give an account or a defense of the Bible as divine, not merely human in origin.